Base sa balitang kumakalat, babalang idineploy ng China ang monster ship, babalang nakita ng Amerika sa Pilipinas, babalang papunta sa Scarborough monster ship. Inalarma tuloy ang Philippine Navy ng Philippine Coast Guard. Ayon kay Commodore Roy Vincent Trinidad, malaki ang posibilidad daw nito na isa ito sa gagawin nila ditong pagtatangka. Itong tangkang gagawin nila kasi ditong pag-aresto o gagawin pagbabantay sa tubo na ibinaon ng China sa Pilipinas.
The actions, the response will be at the NTF-WPS level. It's a Chinese Coast Guard ship, and there will be appropriate response from the NTF, most likely the Philippine Coast Guard. We checked, and we're still trying to find other corroborating reports to that matter. So far, the report is still on its own. It's still unverified or unsubstantiated.
Kasabay naman ng ginawang pag-deploy ng China sa Pilipinas, nag-deploy din ng China sa Taiwan Strait. Eksenong paano silang aatake sa Gyera. Pinangangambahan tuloy mauwi sa gulo ang China at Taiwan Strait, kaya naghahanda din mga Pinoy paano lumikas sa Gyera.
Assured, kasama sa plano yung the manner in which they will be transported. Kapag ang sitwasyon ay lumala, doon na talaga nagkakaroon ng mass nature yung repatriation. Kaya't yung nabanggit nyo, sir, posible talaga mayroon pang hindi gusto mo pero yun nga, as I said, sa karanasan, depende yun sa sitwasyon on the ground.
Pero speaking of paano lumikas sa Gyera, meron naman dito dalawang tinanggal sa serbisyo na membro pa mismo ng PNP SAP. Nahuli kasi silang nagbabodyguard dito sa mga Chino. Di na daw sila nahiya sa mga Pilipino, binabantayan nila ay China.
We go for dismissal. Yun po yung sinabi ko kay Ias po. Gusto ko dismissal. Hindi po kami papayag ng ganito na suspension lang. Sino po talaga nagkamali, then go for dismissal. Alam mo, kahit hindi po galing sa SAF, kahit sa sinong PNP, hindi po tama eh. It affects po yung PNP as a whole. And remember, ang inahabol po namin is to bring back our dignity. Yung nangyayari, there is no perfect organization. Kung sino lang po nagkasala, yun lang po talaga papakusahan namin.
Pero sabi sa Pilipinas ni Ray Powell, malaki ang magiging problema natin sa monster ship ng China. Alam kasi nila paano gagawing legal ang pagpasok sa Scarborough ayon kay Powell. Maliban kasi sa magaling silang magmanipula, magaling din magsinungaling mga inchik sa Pilipinas, babala mismo ni Ray Powell.
Well, so, I think we should start with the fact that actually an intrusive patrol is many things. It is certainly aggressive, it is certainly coercive, but believe it or not, it's actually not illegal under international law. So, the ship actually does have freedom of navigation. It is actually China's practice of blocking Philippine ships within its own economic zone. That would be illegal because they are impinging on the Philippines' freedom of navigation. But they are allowed to navigate even in the Philippines EEZ. The question is, why are they doing it? And clearly the answer is they are trying to intimidate, coerce, and make the Philippines bend to China's will.
Has this been the first time that you've been able to see this vessel come into the EEZ of the Philippines?
No, it's been in a few times before. In fact, it was even in briefly again last month. So this is the second time in 2 months we've seen it come in.
But because this isn't the first time, as you mentioned, should we treat this as something of a provocation?
It is clearly intended to send a message. There's no real reason. So, for example, just to begin with, this ship is of unreasonably large size for a Coast Guard ship. There's really not any sort of reason to have a Coast Guard ship, which is supposed to, provide maritime safety and secure borders. There's no reason to have a 12,000-ton Coast Guard ship. So the entire point of this ship is to intimidate and to coerce, and that's what it does when it's in other countries' EEZs. It's frequently in Vietnam's. It's also in Malaysia's. Sometimes it will visit Indonesia's. So this is why this ship exists, is to send messages.
You mentioned earlier that the movement of the monster is not illegal. That they actually have the right to traverse some waters of exclusive economic zones of other countries. What do you think? Should there be an international law that would govern this, or would at least look at what China is doing?
Well, so what should really happen is that China should be paying a very heavy price on the international stage because of its coercive behavior. This should be the kind of thing that comes up at every meeting of international bodies, because it's not it being illegal or legal or illegal is not necessarily the point. The point is that China is clearly trying to bully its neighbors. And, I mean, particularly, the Philippines, of course, has an ally in the United States. It should come up then. It should come up. It has come up at the G7, which has condemned it. So, these kinds of messages need to be sent very clearly and very consistently that the international community won't abide this kind of behavior.
Now, because this hasn't been the first time, and the Philippines isn't the only country that China has done this with, have you been able to monitor what other countries did that the Philippines can learn from? If I do know that they happen to do this to Vietnam as well.
Yeah, they do. And generally what Vietnam will do is they will shadow the ship. Now, the ships that they shadow it with are much smaller. In fact, almost everything is much smaller than this ship. But they do at least sort of make the point that they're going to keep an eye on it when they're in Vietnam's EEZ. Now, Vietnam, frankly, does have more public vessels to work with than the Philippines does. And Malaysia does something similar, is they will send out their Coast Guard and Navy vessels just to sort of shadow them. Now, having said that, to be fair, there are a lot more Chinese vessels in the Philippines EEZ than in any of its neighbors. And the tensions around Scarborough Shoal and Iron Shoal are unlike those that they face in the other EEZs. It is a much higher level of tension and coercion.
Now let's look at the military foreign policy of President Bongbong Marcos, because what he's doing now is forging ties with a lot of nations to to better the military might of the Philippines. If we do the game that Vietnam did, shadowing this huge vessel, can we ask our foreign allies to assist us, even in just shadowing the monster?
You certainly can. The question is, what does the Philippines want to do, right? And so, one of the things about the way that the China uses its militia and its Coast Guard is to sort of provide a power imbalance against other Coast Guards, right? So nobody has Coast Guard vessels this size because traditionally nobody has needed Coast Guard vessels this size, and so the only thing to bring in that's of comparable size tends to be what we call a gray hull or a Navy ship. And China will often use that sort of just the difference in the color of paint in a lot of ways as a way to say, well, you're provoking us now, we need to escalate. And so it's kind of a very complicated chess game that China likes to play with this by using its very large Coast Guard vessels and its one-of-a-kind militia force to force other countries to have to make those difficult decisions.
All right, one more on this topic. China is imposing a new rule in the West Philippine Sea. They're targeting June 15 for this, and they say that they will be detaining for 60 days with no trial any trespassers in areas that they claim, but these areas are within the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. With the presence of their crafts, should the Philippines appeal to the international community, and what is exactly they should ask for?
Well, I think that the Philippines and its allies and partners need to be very, very clear that China leveraging this policy, which is essentially what it is. It's using its 2021 Coast Guard law and saying we're going to add this policy on top of it as a pretext to detain other countries' civilians even, and that could lead, and this is what really concerns me, to a hostage diplomacy situation where all of a sudden you see a Philippine citizen being kept in a jail cell in Hainan Island, for example, and now China is going to use that circumstance as a way to try to extract concessions while claiming that it's not holding the person hostage, but simply detaining someone who violated its borders. But the clear intent is to put the Philippines over a barrel. So absolutely, I think messages need to be sent very clearly from the international community. And honestly, I would be surprised if we don't hear something from President Marcos at the Shangri-La Dialogue next week in Singapore, where he's the keynote speaker to talk directly to this.
This is something that we really have to, to put a lid on, because it's too much a big issue not to. So let's look at the new Coast Guard post in Batanes, Ray, if you may. Can you give us at least a rundown of the pros and cons of the choice of this new post?
Well, I think it's almost one of those things you must do, right? You have to secure your northern approaches, and the Coast Guard is an important part of national security. It's more than just China, right? There's illegal fishing that happens up there. There are illegal border crossings and those kinds of things that happen up there. It's really one of those things that just, as a nation, you have to be able to do. So I look at it less as a pros and cons thing than it's a simple, this is what a nation has to do to secure its borders.
But don't you think this might lead to more provocation from China, considering that the post is too near Taiwan and China is already imposing its increasing aggressiveness and dominance?
only if China wants to be provoked. Frankly, I mean, this is on Philippine territory. It's a Coast Guard. It's on Philippine territory. If China claims to be provoked by this, then China will be provoked by anything.
What can this do in terms of the Philippines positioning a defensive stance?
Well, I mean, it will help the Philippines to monitor its northern approaches better, and certainly to, if it does see, unauthorized border incursions, and not just by, again, not just by China, but there could be a Taiwanese fishermen, other fishermen that come in. So, I mean, remember, the Coast Guard, at least the way most of the world does Coast Guard, including the United States, is primarily a law enforcement and maritime safety mechanism, and I think that's what they will do. They will enforce the law, they will ensure the safety of mariners, and they will patrol the coast.
Ngayon, ikaw, bilang Pilipino, ano ang masasabi mo at reaksyon sa balitang ito? Mag-iwan ka ng komento sa ibaba at atin pong babasahin isa-isa.